Have you ever wanted to be a pilot in the Air Force Reserves or thought about it? Well, today, this is part two of a discussion me and Josh had about how to do that.
You can watch part one if you haven't already done that with this card right here, or you can check the link in the description. Let's get going with part two.
Let's go.
What's active duty versus, because we haven't explained this yet.
So
We've been talking about it the whole time.
So active duty is, your full-time military, whereas like reserves, traditionally you are like a 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks out of the year. But as aircrew, you know this as well as I do, we have to maintain currency in order to, because I can't just fly once a month and be proficient in the airplane. It's just impossible.
Yeah, so like when I was active duty as a pilot, the Air Force basically owned me, for lack of a better term. It was more than a full-time job, because they could tell me at a moment's notice, hey, you're going to go to this country and you're going to stay there for as long as we tell you to.
Yeah.
So it's more than a full-time job, but it is very much a full-time job. So you have normal duty hours. Typically it's kind of like a normal job in that aspect. When you're home, it's kind of 8 to 5, at least 2 or 3 days out of the week. Sometimes you're working 7 p.m. to 3 a.m. You know, if you're flying night lines, or you might get tasked on a local mission to go, or like an overnight mission to go carry some people somewhere. So as active duty, that's your life. The Air Force is your life, active duty. Guard and Reserve, we get to both do kind of whatever we would like.
I know, it's pretty awesome.
After this, today's Sunday is the last day of drill, so tomorrow I'm gonna put on my just business casual, and I'm gonna go do check rides down in southern Arkansas.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome.
And it's great. That's the big difference. So you'd been active duty at this point as an enlisted, which enlisted means there's kind of two structures in the Air Force. The majority, in the military in general, the majority are enlisted. The pay scale is a little bit lower. In some cases, a lot bit lower, depending on what your rank is. And you're typically the doers. The enlisted folks are the people doing stuff. The officers are typically the managers.
Yep, that's exactly right.
Except in the case of flying, where the officers are the doers. They're the ones that are flying.
Which is a double bonus.
But enlisted are the doers too. We have enlisted air crew, so I guess we should point that out. You could...
That is very true.
You could be enlisted air crew. You won't be a pilot, but you might be a load master, or we even have flight attendants. We have boom operators.
And those guys have some awesome jobs.
We have gunners. That's probably cool.
I had a friend that I went to OTS with who was a aerial gunner.
Yeah.
And I was like, dude, why are you here? That seems like an awesome job. Yeah. And he's like,
So anyway, so this process now, you're trying to go at it at kind of the not the backwards way, but the least common way, where you didn't go through the typical college, ROTC or academy. Here you are. What age were you at this point?
So I think I started my, seems like I was maybe about 27, 28, where I really was focused on.
That's perfect, because I get a lot of people that are like 25, and they're like, I'm too old.
No.
I wanted to go into the Air Force, but I'm too old. And I'm like, how old are you?
And
you're like 28, dude. You're fine. You could totally
you're totally fine. So the thing is, like, I think they've actually lengthened the age now.
Yeah,
but
I think it's like 31.
When I went in, when I went through OTS and UPT, you had to start UPT by your 30th birthday. And my 30th birthday was maybe like a month or two after I...
UPT is...
Undergraduate pilot training. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, it's like our basic...
Yeah, our basic training
to become a Part 141 flight school on steroids.
Yeah, exactly.
On steroids and methamphetamine.
Yeah.
And
that's what it feels like. It's a fire hose.
Oh my gosh. That was the most stressful part of my life, was UPT.
Yeah, so I think they've lengthened the age. I don't know what it is now, but I want to say it's like closer to 32, 33 now. So it's not too late, and the Air Force is taking pilots like crazy right now.
Yeah. So here you are, because you're kind of off in the forest, right? There's no path at this point. So you're off in the forest with a machete, and you're trying to hack your way to become a reserve.
And
or
so now,
guard or active duty. You were just like, somebody, I want to fly.
I want to be a pilot. I don't care which route I take. So the interesting thing is that the active duty has this one path. You go through the recruiter, and that's just how you get it. And there's certain things you got to do. There's certain paperwork you got to fill out. There's certain things you got to have, letters of recommendation.
And I've always heard that like active duty entry through OTS as a pilot is like a unicorn. Like it's really difficult.
Rare. It's rare because like they know what they're getting when they hire somebody out of like the academy or ROTC or something, because like those guys in the academy a lot of times are taking specialized training to become a pilot, whereas me, I got a bachelor's in business, so they're taking a risk when they hire someone like me.
Managed a clothing store too.
Managed a clothing store.
So they were like, oh, well, that might help.
So active duty has this one set of ways of getting in, going through the OTS route or the officer training route, which is what I did. As prior enlisted, once you have your bachelor's degree, you apply for that officer training slot, or you go about it with a different route. And the Guard and Reserves, it's a secret squirrel society over there where like some of the units, it kind of depends on like how busy the units are and how many people they are trying to hire. But the way it usually works is they say, hey, we're hiring people, but nobody knows where that place is. And so at the time, I found a lot of those advertisements by calling the units myself. Like I would call if I wanted to go, like here I think I did call this unit that I'm in now. But other units, they would announce jobs on, at the time it was guardandreserve.com, but I think now it's called Bogi Dope or something.
Yeah.
And I periodically
Bogi Dope is what I recommend people.
Yeah, Bogi Dope has most of the jobs. And I actually found this by just Google searching how to become an Air Force Guard pilot, how to become an Air Force Reserve pilot. And I would call the units. I was already in the Guard in Tulsa, Oklahoma at the time, and I was asking them, like, hey, how can I get to be a pilot? And in Tulsa, they were like, well, we hired too many pilots, so we don't need anybody for probably like 5 or 6 years. So I immediately went on the hunt in other places, and I was like, hey, how can I do this? And they helped me kind of figure out some of these places I could look. And, Guard and Reserves was like the number one spot. But just calling the ops units and being like, hey, I'm interested. And so that would really help as well. But it also helped that I was prior enlisted, so I could literally go on base and like go into the ops units and talk to them. Otherwise, it's kind of hard to get in there in that way.
Yeah, I was trying to think of an analogy because I'm thinking some of our listeners probably don't know how the military works really at all.
Yeah, that's probably true.
And so how the military works is we keep saying the Air Force, but imagine the Air Force is like the state that you're living in. So in our case, it's Arkansas.
Yeah.
So Air Force is is Arkansas. And then Arkansas is, of course, broken into different counties.
Yeah.
And so those counties are kind of like the Air Force bases. So
that's
Arkansas has multiple different counties. I don't know what county we're in. I live in Pope County.
We in
So Pope County is like my Air Force base.
Yeah.
In this analogy. And then on the Air Force base, each county of the state has different cities. And so each Air Force base has different parts to it. So these different cities, which we call squadrons.
Yeah, exactly.
And so we are in a reserve squadron, which is basically like a city in the county of Little Rock Air Force Base, which is in the state of the Air Force. You could probably make some more kind of Matryoshka doll type nesting. But what I'm explaining here is just it's a chain of command. So when you say I want to join the Air Force, that's like saying I want to go to Arkansas.
Well, and that's
and what you were trying to do is you were trying to go to like Little Rock.
Yeah.
The city in Arkansas in that county, unless you have like a military ID, you can't even get into the city.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
So,
and I had that mentality, like you're saying, like when I very first came in, I was thinking about it in the exact same terms that you are. Like, okay, I know I want to be a pilot in the Air Force, but I have no idea the moving parts. And so I like that you kind of broke it down that way.
Yeah. So for our listeners, it's a lot more. We have a lot more autonomy as our squadron.
Yeah.
And we can kind of make hiring decisions, even if you're not in the Air Force.
Yeah.
You can call us directly. I don't know the number to call.
I don't either.
But yeah, we can put you in touch. So if you wanted to join our squadron, it's kind of a complicated process. I mean, there's a big application you got to do.
Yeah.
And there's interview process, so it's not easy.
It's a little complicated, and it's very competitive, which is a good thing because we want the best. We want the best people we can get to come in here. So
yeah, absolutely. We don't want it to be easy, and very few things in life that are worth doing are easy.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
So this isn't easy, but it's worth doing, and it's fun.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's really cool. You went through, the other thing you said, you went through OTS.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of how you get trained to be an officer.
Yeah, so if you...
So what do y'all do in OTS? Do you practice yelling at people? Is that what you do?
I tell people this, and they get a good laugh out of it, but I felt like OTS was this school where you go, and they say, you're in charge of this, you're in charge of this, and you're in charge of this. Now, tell people what to do, and we're going to grade you on it, so... That's kind of the way I felt about OTS. There was a lot of like papers to be written and stuff like that, and they were very, we marched around.
Did you have to do we had these drills where we had a box they would paint a box on the parking lot, and we had to march a unit.
Yeah.
We would stand at the corner of this box, and we would give these specific commands to this unit of people marching around. And they had to stay within the box, and if they went outside of the box, it was they made it so stressful. I look back on that and I'm like, that was so ridiculous.
It was so funny because so they told us nothing. It was kind of a game of, so I went to basic training obviously to be enlisted, but then when I came to be an officer, they tell you nothing in officer training school. They're like, it's basically you need to figure it out on your own because you're going to be an officer, and we want you to make decisions on your own. And so they're like, okay, you guys are going to learn to march. You guys learn to march. And, they gave us a book, but, the prior enlisted guys, we'd be like, oh my goodness, we're terrible at this. And so we would take the initiative and march everybody around and kind of teach them how to do it because we kind of already got that drilled in our head in basic training. So it wasn't too bad because we kind of already had an idea of what we should be doing. But, it had been 9 years since I had gone to basic. And so I was pretty rusty myself, but
yeah, I was actually in Civil Air Patrol as a kid since I was 14. I learned to fly in the CAP. And the CAP, we learned to march. And so when I went to my field training, which is our officer basic training, we do these drills, and I was like, okay, yeah, I've got that. Of course, we practiced ROTC.
Yeah.
At the U of A, we had leadership laboratories twice a week.
Yeah.
So when you're in ROTC, you go through college as a civilian. You're not really in the Air Force. You're in the Air Force ROTC. So you would wear just normal clothes, and you'd go to your class 3 days a week. But 2 days a week, or maybe it was 1 day a week, I don't know, at least 1 day a week, you would wear your uniform to class. And you had a laboratory. It was called the Leadership Laboratory. And you would practice marching there. And then we'd have to meet on weekends. We would meet, I think, 3 or 4 days a week in the morning for PT. So you would get up at 4 a.m.
Ugh.
You would go to PT, and then you would get into your street clothes, and you'd go to class, and you'd be all tired,
Extra coffee.
You'd practice some of these skills for, a couple of years before you went to field training. You did that in the summer, I think, in between your sophomore and junior year of college is when we did our basic training.
Yeah, because those ROTC guys would come into the OTS. It's the same place. They would come in, and we'd be so jealous they only spent 2 weeks there. It's only 2 months long, OTS, but we're still we're ready to leave this place.
This is ridiculous.
Yeah.
I could see how it would be more irritating too if you're older, because you have an idea of how the real world works and you'd interacted with it, and you, especially being prior enlisted, you already knew how
Yeah.
the big Air Force works, and you're like, okay, we don't really march in the Air Force.
No.
Why are we learning how to march here? Because we never do that.
So it was that was very difficult for me being prior enlisted, and I was a tech sergeant prior to
Oh wow, so you were
crossing over. So it's like I went from a little bit of respect to zero respect whatsoever. And at first it was really hard, but then I learned, oh, I'm just a dumb second lieutenant, so if I don't know the answer, I can just pawn it off on somebody else. So that it had its advantages, so I learned to appreciate that.
That's cool. Well, no, I mean, hopefully people find this,
for sure,
useful. I think, if anything, you come away from this, listening to this, with an idea like, hey, there's different flavors of the Air Force.
Yeah.
And the main thing I want people to know, that if you're interested in joining the Air Force, you need to do it. And I won't say you're never too old, but if you're in your 20s, you're not too old at all.
Yeah, for sure.
And I would really recommend it. And I tell everybody that's like, oh, I think I might want to join the Air Force. I'm like, well, you need to do it now, because it's not one of those things you can put off and do later.
Yeah, you can't.
Like when you're in your 30s, you're like, oh, okay, I think I'm ready to join the Air Force. Well, you can join, but you're not going to be a pilot.
No.
And you may not even be able to get in your 30s. You probably can, but you're not going to be a pilot more than likely.
It's one of those things that kind of fluctuates too. Like a few years ago, they were hiring older people, but like when I came in, you couldn't join even being enlisted if you're older than like 27, 28. So it's changed back and forth, and I'm sure it will continue to be that way. But
yeah, and if you're one of these folks that have made it to the airlines, even say you're flying with SkyWest and you're still got that itch, you're like, man, I'd really like to join the Air Force. Go onto this website called Bogi Dope. That's probably the best
That's
website.
an excellent starting point.
But even if you're in the airlines, you can join the reserves as just a part-timer. So a traditional reservist, where you work 1 weekend a month. You'll go on orders for a while, which means you'll go full-time to go through pilot training.
Yeah.
But that pilot training might be abbreviated, is what I'm hearing. Like if you're already ATP or multi-rated, you might get to skip part of pilot training.
Yeah.
Depending on what aircraft you go to fly.
I don't know how it was for you, but we had a few guys that were, just regional airline pilots that came through with us, or CFIs, somebody that had like a little bit more experience. Yeah. And I tell you, they were light years ahead of like me.
Oh yeah, we had I'm trying to think of his name. I think it was Andy. Andy, I'm sorry, I forget your last name. He's flying C-17s or something. He's at an airline now. But he was like a regional guy.
Yeah.
And, I remember the first time, like I was just a private pilot, and I had no idea what instruments were. And we were standing there looking at the T6 cockpit, and Andy was in there saying, yeah, I'm just shooting the ILS. And I was like, what does that even mean? Like,
I don't even know what you're talking about.
Gun? Like, I see some lines there that I remember that in the 172, but I really have no idea what that means. And tuning a frequency, I'm like, I can fly a traffic pattern, but that's about it.
Hey, traffic pattern altitude's 1,000 feet.
He was really, he was really useful helping our class.
They've kind of changed the way that undergraduate pilot training works, though. They're kind of instrument focused in the beginning now, so you do a lot of instruments in the simulators prior to crossing over to the flight line side. And so, like, I hadn't flown, maybe 5 years before I went to undergraduate pilot training, and I wanted to go to. So they have another training course prior to UPT, undergraduate pilot training, where you go basically learn how to fly the airplane if you don't have your private pilot's license. And they wouldn't let me go because I had my private pilot's license, but I was like, hey, well, I haven't flown in like 5 years. Don't you think it'd be a good idea to go? And then, nah, you're fine. And so, but the way they teach it now, it's so basic, and the T6 is so easy to fly that like I picked up things pretty quick in the simulator, and then I did just fine. Like,
yeah, the simulators they have are nice.
Yeah,
and the
they
T6, I mean, it's intimidating a little bit.
Yeah.
I could see it being more intimidating if you've flown other airplanes.
Yeah, I can see that.
You would be surprised, the listeners I think would be surprised if you knew how many Air Force pilots go into pilot training with like zero flying experience.
Yeah.
Like
they teach you to fly.
They've never been in an airplane before.
This makes me remember like my first instrument class in the simulator. They had me intercept a radial outbound or something, and I like turned to intercept, and I stalled the airplane. And he's like, "Well, that's the first time I've ever seen that." And I was like, "Thank you."
Yeah, we had some of my classmates, because the flight screening we did in the DA-20,
Yeah.
but you didn't even get your private. You got like 20 hours. And so I was flying this DA-20, and I'd had like a whole 50 hours in a 172.
Yeah.
And these guys were in the DA-20 putting around, and they did that for 20 hours. And then we show up, and the DA-20 is maybe, what is that, 100 horsepower, low wing, 2-seat.
Yeah, I think it's something like that, 100, 120. Something.
And so 3 months after that, you're getting in an ejection seat of a T6
with 1,100 horsepower.
1,100 horsepower.
Yeah, you basically 10 times your...
And then like 10 hours after that, you're soloing the T6.
Oh, it's nuts.
And you do a formation solo.
Yeah.
I'll never forget. So I did a pattern solo, right? That was a big deal. And you get dunked, right? You get thrown in the dunk tank after your first T6 solo. And then we went straight to like advanced contact phase, where they teach you aerobatics, and then like three flights learning aerobatics, and then like, okay, now you go do an area solo, and we want you to go out there and practice aerobatics by yourself.
Yeah, I could not believe they let us do that.
I had so much fun. It was
I did as well.
A blast. I just love flying the T6. It was a blast.
I did too. It was an awesome little airplane. Yeah. Well, so did you want to talk a little bit about the rest of the training, or should we save that for a future episode?
Yeah, I think we could talk. We could do a whole episode on UPT.
Yeah,
that'd be interesting, awesome. To kind of break that down of what Air Force pilot training looks like, and then we could do a show, because I taught at the FTU, which is where you learn how to fly the C-130.
Okay. So that'd be good. Have a separate episode for that.
Yeah. If people are interested, I guess they can leave a comment.
Yeah, you can comment below if you'd like to see an episode like that.
Yeah.
Smash that like button if that sounds interesting to you. Also, if you weren't aware, you're already on Seth Lake's YouTube channel, and so if you would and you enjoyed this video, click down there on that subscribe button so you can see more content just like this.
Yeah, I think we're going to have part 2 on my channel. So if you're watching this, you just watched part 2. You kind of dropped in on our conversation. So if you want to see what part 1 was, click on the link below, and it'll take you over to Josh's channel.
Yep.
Where you can watch part 1. We probably should have done that before, but whatever. It's just a conversation. So, and you can message me at Seth@vsl.aero. That's my email address. If you've got any questions you'd like to ask, we can handle it in a future episode. I think we'll do this again.
Yeah, for sure.
So this is fun.
For sure.
All right. Thanks for talking, man.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Good
All
talking
right.
to you.